The other day I was driving home from Lihue after running some errands, and as usual I had a lot to do when I got back home to Kōloa. However, right past the college, I pulled up behind a car that was going about 30 miles an hour, and that car went 30 miles an hour for an awfully long time. Finally, when I got to that passing lane that we all know and love so well, I was so excited to be able to pass that slow car, and I'll just tell you, I hit the gas. What surprised me is the driver of that other car also hit the gas. And lo and behold, that car could do better than 30 after all. In fact, pretty soon that car was going 40 and then 50 and then 60, and eventually I slowed down because I realized that the driver in that car did not want me to pass his or her car. And I thought, how odd, but at least that car's going to go faster now. But then we get past the passing lane, and that car slows down to 30 again. And I'm going to tell you, I was baffled. I just couldn't believe it. I thought, why in the world would someone go 30 when they can go 50? When that's the posted speed limit? And then, why would they care if I was in front of them or behind them? Because they're going to go the same speed anyway, apparently. And then I thought, why in the world would someone ever drive like that? My guess is this has happened to some of you at least a few times between Lihue and Kōloa. The idea of being totally baffled by something has been on my mind lately for that and many other reasons. But to be baffled means to be utterly perplexed. And I'll tell you, that's what I was feeling when I was driving home that day. I was utterly perplexed. I simply could not figure out why someone would drive like that. My guess is that we all have our moments of bafflement, and there are many times and many places where that happens. I want to tell you that when I was reading Parker Palmer's book On the Brink of Everything this week, I was a little surprised when he used the word baffled when it came to his vocation. For you see, to me, vocation is something that I want a lot of clarity on. But let me read you what he wrote in the chapter. He writes, I became a writer because I was born baffled. Bafflement, he goes on to say, I believe, is one of my birthright gifts. I must have emerged from the womb, been slapped into breathing, taken a long look around and said, what the heck is this all about? Born into a world where there's a lot that's baffling, he writes, I never lack for subjects. So my approach to writing is simple. I find something that baffles me, right enough to peel back the first layer of my not knowing, at which point I find another bafflement, and then another, and another, and another. So I find it fascinating that he talks about bafflement and vocation together. When I was younger, all I wanted in terms of what I was supposed to do with my life was clarity. Bafflement was not what I was looking for. But here is a writer and a spiritual leader that embraces bafflement. Being baffled is a good thing to him. It gives him a reason for life, for writing, and for his ministry. I know when I was younger, I was trying to figure out, well, what has God called me to do? And to be completely honest with you, God has never been very clear about the specifics, the particulars. The general things, yes, love people, love the people you come in contact with, and love the people who are on the margins of society. Love, love, love. But, oh God, what does that mean for me? What am I supposed to major in college? What am I supposed to do for my next job? God never spoke to me and said, Alan, be a minister, be a pastor of a church, do this or do that. Those things I just kind of discovered as I went along on the general principle of going out into the world to love the best I can. And my guess is most of you kind of experienced your vocation in the same way. Every once in a while I talk to somebody who was so clear at a young age, even when they were teenagers, or maybe even before, they just knew they were supposed to be a doctor or an attorney or a pastor or a musician or whatever. But in terms of the particulars, most of us find that out as we go along, as we're open, as we say, God, what in the heck is next? I'm baffled. Vocation is not the same thing as the jobs that we do in our lives. And Parker Palmer makes that very clear. Vocation comes from the Latin word vocare, which means to call. It actually means what we are called to be as much as what we are called to do. But why did God bring us into this world at the time that we were born? God has called us to do something because God has called us to be something in the world. Now, oftentimes I wish, and I even pray, oh God, why can't you just be a little more clear here? I don't know what to do next. I don't know what to be or to do sometimes. But yet, for some reason, I have just discovered with every step along the way in my journey, vocationally and otherwise, God keeps showing up. No matter what it is that I do, even if I'm stumbling and fumbling and just trying to figure out how to get to wherever it is that I'm supposed to be next, God is there. God just keeps showing up. And according to Parker Palmer, and according to the scriptures, and now I think according to me, that is really what vocation is all about. Asking God, why did you put me here? What am I supposed to be doing right now? And how are you showing up at this moment before I take that next step, knowing that when I do, you're going to be there as well, oh God. In Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, there's this verse that we just heard a little while ago. And it goes like this. We have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. Another translation says, we have this treasure in earthen vessels. I like that translation too, because frankly, who we are is made out of the earth. We are earthen vessels. And the idea here is that no matter what it is that we are doing at the time, and no matter what it is that God has called us to do, we carry God with us. So Parker Palmer says, the treasure is God. It's God's unconditional and eternal love for each and every one of us. So we, as those earthen vessels or clay jars, we carry God. Think about that for a while. Just let that settle in, because that really is extraordinary. Wherever we go, we carry God with us. And I used to think it was like a little piece of God is in me and in you and each of us. But actually, the more I thought about it, I think the fullness of God is in each of us. In this sense, if I am carrying just a drop of water, I have the fullness of water in my hand. You take out hydrogen or oxygen, it's not water anymore. And in the same way, the fullness of God we carry with us wherever we go. The fullness of God is right here with us in this church. And when we go out these doors back home or into our communities, we carry the fullness of God with us. Some of us just realize it much more than others. And some of us embrace it more than others. And some of us are just so much more eager to allow that fullness of God to take us over and to fill us up and to overflow out onto the world and to everybody we meet. We all carry the fullness of God within us. And I've always believed and still do that we are those earthen vessels that carry that treasure of God and God's love. However, Parker Palmer challenged me this week in the chapter that we are reading by thinking of this in a new way as well. He never says you are not the earthen vessel, but here are some additional things that he says, which I found not just challenging, but very inspiring. And he says this about his own vocation as a writer. The earthen vessels are, among other things, the words we choose to convey what we know and believe. So when we speak something to somebody else, those words are actually vessels. And how much of God those words contain is really up to us. If we speak those words in love, or in his case, he's a writer, if he writes those words in love, the fullness of God is in those words. Imagine that our words can carry the fullness of God when we talk to other people, whether it is a loved one, a family member, a friend, a neighbor, or somebody that we're in conflict with. He also, after sharing with us how our words carry the fullness of God, he gives us a warning. And here's his warning. For me, he writes, the meaning of the verse about clay jars, earthen vessels, is simple yet demanding. Every single vessel we create to hold the treasure that is earthen, finite, and flawed, and it is never, ever to be confused with the treasure itself. So what he's getting at here is the idea of idolatry. And idolatry is anything that takes the place of God, or anything that we worship in the place of God. Parker Palmer talks about how even our words can be our idols. And he, as a writer, knows that he's especially vulnerable to that. It's easy for him to think about, oh, how great I am, what a good writer I am, look at how many books I've published, and all of a sudden, that starts to become more of God to him than actually being those earthen vessels that simply are the things that carry God's love to everyone. And I'll tell you, my friends, we are all vulnerable to that kind of idolatry in our lives. Every single one of us carries God in some way. And when we let that get to our head, we think it's all about us, that becomes idolatry. And so Parker Palmer warns us and tells us, pay attention to who you are being, the words you are speaking, and everything else you are doing. Because if it's not all about God's love for other people and it starts to become about you, there's a problem. And that very same verse about earthen vessels also says that it is about God. It is not about us. That extraordinary power of sharing God's love, it comes from God. It is God. It is not about us. And so Parker Palmer very wisely helps us to think about how God has called us to be in the world and what God has called us to do, but also to pay attention to see whenever those things start getting to our head and thinking, I'm pretty good at this. Maybe it's really all about me. So, a couple other quotes I wanted to read. And he goes on about the idolatry. He says, if our clay pots proved too cramped to hold the treasure well, if they keep us from having a live encounter with what's true, in other words, God, or if they prove so deformed that they defile rather than honor the treasure they are meant to hold, then we must smash them. We must smash them and find something better suited to holding the treasure and passing it along. And it's clear to me that he is talking about his words, but he's also talking about all the temptations we have as people. And it might be our bodies, it might be our words, it might also be our patterns, our habits, our behaviors. It might even be our theology, which becomes so important to us because we have to be right and everybody else has to be wrong. And we get so caught up sometimes in what we believe that the love just seems to disappear from it. And Parker Palmer warns us to be willing to smash whatever it is that gets in the way between us and God's love and sharing God's love with the world. So most of you know, unless you've got your head buried in the sand, that we are living in a time right now which is dark in many ways because of the coronavirus, COVID-19. And in the passage about the earthen vessels, the clay jars, the Apostle Paul also talks about light in the midst of darkness. And we actually carry light within us. No matter how dark it gets within us, the light of God's love is always there. And when we look around the world and we see darkness because of fear or confusion or hatred or racism or any other ism, we carry the light of God's love wherever we go. And this week, even yesterday, as I was thinking about this morning's message, I was thinking, this strange time that we're in right now, we've never, at least in my lifetime, we've never been in a time when things are just shutting down. In fact, most of my colleagues on the mainland have canceled worship services. I mean, this is just like hard for me to wrap my head around. And I also know that we may get to the point where we have to do our worship services online for a short while. That's possible, and if that's what we need to do to keep safe, we're willing to do that, right? But this is a really strange and confusing time for us. It's also a very fearful time for many people. My son Polani and his girlfriend Isabel had a trip planned to southern Utah and Grand Canyon. They're hiking in the national parks of Utah and then wrapping it up in the Grand Canyon. And they decided to go on their trip because basically New York City is shut down. Broadway is shut down. The campus where they're both students is shut down. And most of the universities on the mainland have just told people, go home. Don't come back for the rest of the quarter or the rest of the semester. At least for a month or two, but for many students are just gone. And so Polani and Isabel are hiking, and they've called me a couple times just saying, we're not quite sure where we're supposed to go after this, because there may be nothing for us in New York. Maybe we can go back to our apartment and just sit there all day, but Dad, can we, if we can get to Hawaii, can we just come here? And I'm just like, of course. But it's like, as I'm thinking about what it's like for many people in many communities throughout the world, China, Italy, a good part of Europe now, and in the United States, there's this uncertainty and fear that is, I believe, our dark time that we're going through right now. Just to put things into perspective, I Googled some things just over the last couple days, just wondering how people die in our country. I know it's like a really, enlightening and uplifting thing to do. But, I just thought we are making a big deal about COVID-19, and we should be. But just to put it in perspective, I was wondering how most people are dying at this point. And here's some statistics I came up with. And this was really interesting for me, and I hope it is for you. Well, first of all, as of yesterday, and I think this morning, 58 people have died so far from COVID-19 in the United States. That's about 1 per state. I looked up influenza. So far during this flu season, 14,000 people have died from influenza during this current flu season. So the same period of time where 58 people have died from COVID-19, 14,000 people have died from the flu. And frankly, 250,000 people have been hospitalized so far because of the flu. Since January 1st, there have been 8,000 deaths in the U.S. due to gun violence. And so I like numbers. I'm not necessarily good at numbers, but I like playing around with them. And I came up with this figure. You are 240 times more likely to die from the flu than coronavirus so far up until today. So 240 times. You are 140 times more likely to die from a bullet since January 1st. than the same period of time, coronavirus, COVID-19. So why is it that we are so concerned? And the reason is because there is so much uncertainty. We don't know what the future holds at all. For the flu, we have flu shots. And the flu has been around for so long, we've just gotten used to it. We know that thousands and thousands and thousands of people die of the flu every year, and we take precautions, and it's basically under control because of the things we know about it. And when it comes to gun violence, as horrible as that is, we also know that there's certain things we can do and avoid so that we're not killed by a gun. But for the coronavirus, we don't know if this is going to end at the end of flu season. We don't know when there's going to be a vaccine. There's so much that we don't know, and so it's right and good for us to be concerned, and the fear and anxiety that comes from that is actually pretty healthy, I think, and pretty normal. But I do encourage us to think about the perspective, the big picture of it all. And I also hope that we will take every precaution as individuals and as a church to remain healthy and to reach out to people right now who are particularly fearful. So I know of at least 4 people since yesterday that have just said, I'm not coming to church. I can't risk it. I'm one of those people that just can't get sick. And so we have to bless people that don't come to church. And some of you might feel like that in the near future. We don't know what's going to happen in the weeks to come. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But here's some things I would like for us to think about. I invite you to commit, actually, to these things. First of all, ask yourself who in our church and in our community might need something. There are some people that we know, and you probably can just think of several of these people off the top of your head, who are some of the vulnerable people, either because of their age or their health, that simply are probably not going to be around people. They might need something. And so, give them a call. Sometimes they just need to hear another voice and know that somebody from their church cares. But be thinking, look around the pews, who's missing today? Give them a call and just say, I missed you, I understand. If they say, I just can't risk being in church right now, we continue to be the beloved community. We are God's community of faith as we worship Jesus Christ. Whether we're worshiping together in this room or we're going online and looking at the sermon in a couple days or whatever, we're still that community. And so pay attention to those that are here and not here, and consider what they need. I also just invite you to pray for those that are being affected by the coronavirus and from other illness as well. And frankly, that is all of us. Whether we get the virus or not, we are all impacted, whether it comes to travel or the stock market or going back to a dorm room or maybe having our kids or grandkids come and stay with us for a while because their school's closed. Every single one of us is being affected and will continue to be affected in one way or the other. May we reach out in love, and may we also have common sense. May we be smart. So some of the things that we've asked you to do in church today, rather than shaking hands and hugging, just putting your hand on your heart or both hands or the bowing, it's like, to me, that's just common sense stuff. I'm hoping that we will keep these doors open, that we will continue to have Aloha Hour. I don't know. That might change this week. But as long as we're together, let us continue to be praying, to looking, and also committed to looking around us and saying who might have special needs and how can we help. And let us also just trust in God's love and trust in the love of this congregation, because we are here together in God's love. And regardless of how your light is shining from the clay jar, the earthen vessel that you are and that you carry with you, the light of God is always in us and around us because we all carry God, our extraordinary treasure, wherever we go.